In 1916, the Arab tribes of the Middle East were fighting and dying for Britain. They had been promised something in return: independence, a unified Arab state stretching from Syria to Arabia, freedom from 4 centuries of Ottoman rule. Britain had put it in writing. Britain was lying. At the exact moment British officials were promising Arab leaders their own nation, 2 men were negotiating in secret to divide the entire Middle East between Britain and France. The Arabs would get nothing. The promises would be buried. And what those 2 men agreed to in the winter of 1915 would set in motion a chain of decisions still shaping the Middle East today. Almost nobody outside the region knows their names. One was a British diplomat named Mark Sykes. The other was a French diplomat named François Georges-Picot. And what they agreed to was one of the most consequential acts of deception in modern history. To understand what they did, you need to understand what was happening in 1915. The Ottoman Empire, which had ruled the Arab world for 4 centuries, had entered the First World War on Germany's side. Britain needed to destroy it from the inside, and the fastest way to do that was to convince the Arab tribes it ruled to revolt. The man Britain approached was Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca, guardian of Islam's holiest cities and the most respected Arab leader of the era. Hussein had the authority to call Arabs to arms across the entire region. If he launched a revolt, it would tear the Ottoman Empire apart from within. Britain needed him, and Hussein knew it. He negotiated hard. His terms were clear: Arab support for Britain in exchange for British support for Arab independence after the war. A unified Arab state covering the Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, Syria, and Palestine. A nation for a people who had been ruled by outsiders for centuries. Britain's representative Henry McMahon exchanged 10 letters with Hussein between July 1915 and March 1916, the Hussein-McMahon correspondence, confirming British support for Arab independence in the territories Hussein had outlined. The letters told Hussein what he needed to hear. Britain was on his side. What Hussein did not know was that while McMahon was writing those letters, other British officials were in a separate room negotiating a completely different future for his promised nation. The primary negotiations between Sykes and Picot began in November 1915, before the Hussein-McMahon correspondence had even concluded. By January 3, 1916, the 2 men had initialed an agreed memorandum. Their governments ratified it in May 1916. And in late April 1916, as the Arab Revolt was being finalized, McMahon himself was finally told the terms of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. He and his superior agreed that none of it would be disclosed to the Arabs. The Arab Revolt was officially launched by Hussein on June 10, 1916. Fighters under his son Faisal, advised by a British officer named T.E. Lawrence, began tearing the Ottoman Empire apart from within. They blew up railways, they captured ports, they tied down Ottoman forces across the region. They bled and died for promises Britain had already decided to break. What did Sykes and Picot actually agree to? Britain would take direct control of what is now central and southern Iraq, the Baghdad and Basra provinces. France would take direct control of what is now coastal Syria and Lebanon. The vast interior, modern Syria, northern Iraq and Jordan would be divided into zones of British and French influence with nominally independent Arab leadership that would in practice answer to London and Paris. Palestine would be placed under international administration. The lines they drew paid no attention to the communities living inside them. They cut across tribal territories, separated ethnic populations, and divided regions with no shared political identity. They were drawn not for the people who lived there, but for the empires that wanted to control what came next. And the man fighting alongside the Arabs, T.E. Lawrence, knew exactly what was happening. Lawrence later wrote in 7 Pillars of Wisdom that it was evident from the beginning that if we won the war, these promises would be dead paper. He wrote that he had joined the conspiracy, that he had endorsed Britain's written promises to Arab fighters, knowing what those promises were worth. He called it the fraud. He admitted he had risked it, because Arab help was necessary to Britain's victory, and there was no other way to get it. Here were the Arabs believing me, he wrote, my bodyguard dying for me, and I began to wonder if all established reputations were founded, like mine, on fraud. Then in November 1917, the Bolsheviks burned the whole arrangement into the open. The Russian Revolution brought Lenin to power. The Bolsheviks immediately published the secret treaties of the old Tsarist government as proof of imperial hypocrisy. Among the documents they published was the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It landed in the Arab world like a bomb. Hussein was shown the published text. He confronted British officials demanding an explanation. The British told him the document had been misrepresented, that it was out of date, that his promises remained valid. He did not fully believe them. He could not fully disbelieve them either. The revolt was already underway. His sons were commanding armies in the field, and there was no path back. He kept fighting. In the same month, November 1917, Britain issued another declaration that complicated everything further. The Balfour Declaration. A letter from Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to a leader of the British Jewish community stating that Britain viewed with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Palestine, already the subject of conflicting promises to Hussein and of competing interests under Sykes-Picot, was now the subject of a third commitment to a third people entirely. 3 promises. 1 piece of land, no one coordinating any of it. The war ended in November 1918. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The Arab leaders who had fought for Britain arrived at the peace negotiations expecting independence. The borders that eventually emerged across the next several years were not a carbon copy of what Sykes and Picot had literally drawn. Russia's exit from the war, the rise of Turkish nationalism, and the realities of which armies occupied which territories all shifted the final line significantly. But the fundamental framework held. Britain and France divided authority over the Arab world between themselves, through League of Nations mandates that used the language of stewardship to describe what was in practice colonial control. When Faisal, Hussein's son, the commander of the Arab forces, tried to establish an independent Arab government in Damascus, French forces defeated his army at the Battle of Maysalun in July 1920 and expelled him from the country. Britain, feeling some obligation, made him king of the newly created state of Iraq the following year, a state assembled from 3 former Ottoman provinces with no shared political identity, divided between Sunni Arabs, Shia Arabs, and Kurds, governed by a Hashemite king from the Hejaz, who had no prior connection to the country he was now ruling. Hussein bin Ali himself, the man who had launched the Arab Revolt on the basis of British promises, was driven from his throne in the Hejaz by Ibn Saud in 1924. He died in exile in 1931. He never received the nation he had been promised. He never stopped believing he had been betrayed. He was right. Mark Sykes did not live to see any of what followed. He died on February 16, 1999, in his room at the Hotel Lottie in Paris, while attending the peace conference, age 39, a victim of the Spanish flu. The man whose name is attached to the division of the Middle East died before the final map was even drawn. François Georges-Picot lived until 1951. He watched the region he had helped divide spend 3 decades dismantling the settlement he had built. 2 diplomats. Months of negotiations conducted in secret. An agreement that set the terms, not the final lines, but the terms for how the Arab world would be carved up after the war. The conflicts that followed in the decades after had many causes. Local politics, colonial mismanagement, Cold War interference, the rise of sectarian movements, the discovery of oil, none of it reduces to a single agreement signed in 1916. History is never that simple. But what Sykes and Picot established was this: that Arab independence was not what the great powers intended, that the promises made to Hussein were instruments, not commitments, that the Arab future would be decided in rooms where no Arabs sat. That framework, not the specific lines on a specific map, but the assumption that the Middle East was Europe's to divide, is what 1916 produced. And the resentment it created in the Arab world was real, and it was justified. They made the deal in the dark. The people who were never consulted are still living with the consequences. If this made you see where the modern Middle East actually began, subscribe to History Brief. Every video on this channel goes deeper than the version of history you were taught.